Anastasia rushed to the club upon receiving a distress call from her friend Haley, where she lost her virginity and later discovered it was a conspiracy orchestrated by Haley and her stepsister Erika. Furthermore, she was falsely accused of pandering at the club for money and was subsequently kicked out of her father's house. 5 years later, Anastasia was living in an apartment when two men, sent by Lady Presgrave, came to see her. Her mother had once saved Lady Presgrave's eldest grandson, but she refused to meet them. "I'm sorry, but I don't intend to see her." Just then, a tender and curious voice came from somewhere inside the house. "Mom, who is it?" "Nobody," Anastasia quickly replied. Then she turned to the men at the door and said, "Sorry, I'm really not in the mood to entertain guests right now." With that, she closed the door. Meanwhile, a man learned that a girl from a club 5 years ago had sold his watch at a flea market and ordered his men to find her. The room was bathed in warm lighting. The man sitting on the sofa had a flawless face, his handsome visage a meticulously crafted artwork of heaven. He wore a well-tailored suit that accentuated his strong physique. Elliot Presgrave's eyes turned cold as he recalled his grandmother's words. "You must marry Anastasia Tillman. She is the only granddaughter-in-law I acknowledge in the Presgrave family." However, the only person Elliot was thinking of now was the woman he spent one night with 5 years ago. On that fateful night 5 years ago, he experienced the first and only setback in his life. His rival drugged his drink, hoping to ruin his reputation by exploiting him. Elliot randomly entered a room to evade those who wanted to frame him, but just as the drug's effects peaked, a random woman rushed in and helped him get rid of the trouble. This incident had haunted his conscience ever since. He was convinced that she had been virgin until that night. All he remembered was the woman desperately crying and begging. When it was all over, he took off his watch, handed it to her, and fell asleep. He had to take responsibility for what he had done. 5 years had passed and he was still searching for her. It was only last week that he learned she had sold his watch at a flea market, but the news came too late. His grandmother insisted that he marry another woman. Just then his phone rang again. He picked it up and asked coldly, "What is it?" "Mr. Elliot, we found the girl. Her name is Haley Seymour and she sold the watch herself. Send me her address." "I'll go visit her," Elliot commanded with a flash of excitement in his eyes. Elliot found Haley, confirmed the watch incident, and Haley lied that she was the woman from 5 years ago and demanded that Elliot take responsibility. Elliot promised to take responsibility and arranged a villa for her, while Haley hoped to become Mrs. Presgrave and viciously wished Anastasia were dead. Meanwhile, Anastasia was in an apartment abroad, preparing to return to her country to participate in a competition, accompanied by a child of 4 or 5 years old. Elsewhere, Anastasia was in an apartment somewhere abroad. She received a call and said, "Got it. Give me a maximum of 3 days to return and prepare for the competition." "Mom, are we going back?" A small figure walked up to her. He wore a blue checkered shirt and denim shorts. His facial features were well defined but somewhat childish. He was only around 4 years old, but his movements exuded undeniable elegance and nobility. Anastasia smiled and nodded. "Would you like to come with me?" "Of course, wherever you are, I'll be there." The little boy's big eyes, resembling shiny onyx, curved into crescents. Anastasia couldn't help but think how beautiful this child was. Every time she looked at his face, she felt a sense of comfort and gratitude, as if she were in awe of how she had managed to give birth to such a cute little baby. "Then let's pack up now. We're going to the airport tomorrow afternoon." "Okay." The little guy nodded firmly and rushed into the room to pack his luggage. Anastasia sighed. She had been living abroad since her father kicked her out of the house 5 years ago. 5 years had passed and it wasn't that she didn't want to go home, it was that she had no place there. She hadn't even told her father about giving birth to the child abroad. Now that she was returning to develop her career, she was determined to meet the old man. After all, he was still her father. At an international airport 3 days later, Anastasia and her son had just stepped into the airport hall when two men in suits approached them. "Miss Tillman, we are sent by Lady Presgrave. She has arranged a car for you at the entrance. Please." She rejected Lady Presgrave's offer of a ride. After learning that Anastasia was a single mother, Lady Presgrave asked her grandson Elliot to take care of them. Elliot, though unwilling, ultimately agreed. Anastasia, the chief designer, was recalled to expand the brand in her country. She lived in a company-arranged apartment and was filled with emotions as she recalled what happened 5 years ago. She hesitated over her father's phone number. She blinked and politely said to them, "I appreciate the kindness of the Presgraves, but I don't need a ride." "Thank you, Miss Presgrave. Lady Presgrave sincerely wants to meet you," the middle-aged man said respectfully. Anastasia knew that Lady Presgrave had no malice, but she really didn't intend to accept her kindness. "Please tell Lady Presgrave that my mother was a policeman and her duty was to save others. You don't need to repay it, at least not for me." With that she left. One of the men took out his phone and respectfully informed, "Mr. Elliot, Miss Tillman refused our offer to pick her up." At the entrance of the airport, a black Rolls-Royce was parked with Elliot sitting inside. He caught sight of a young woman passing by his car. The woman wore a white top and regular jeans. Despite her simple attire, there was no doubt that she stood out in the crowd. Just then Elliot's gaze was drawn to something, or rather someone. A boy around 4 or 5 years old sitting in the woman's stroller. He wore a gray sweater with his thick, soft hair falling over his forehead. His small and delicate features made him even more adorable. At this moment, Anastasia knelt down to help the little one tidy up his clothes. No one could misunderstand the gentleness and indulgence in her eyes. "Who is that child? Is Anastasia married? If so, then I don't have to marry her to fulfill my grandmother's wish." With these thoughts in mind, Elliot watched Anastasia and her child get into a taxi. Soon after, he asked his driver to leave as well. Not long after they departed, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and greeted, "Hey Haley." "Elliot, when are you coming to see me?" "I miss you," came Haley's shy voice from the other end. "I've been a bit busy lately, but I'll come to see you whenever I'm free," he replied in a low voice. Meanwhile, at the Presgrave residence, a silver-haired old lady was sitting on the sofa sipping tea. When she heard her subordinate's latest findings, she looked up in shock and asked, "What? Anastasia has a child? Is she married?" "According to our investigation, the child's father has never appeared, so we assume she has an illegitimate child," the subordinate replied. "Oh, poor child. Such a young single mother." Harriet Presgrave, better known as Lady Presgrave, sighed. Just then an elegant and tall figure walked into the living room. It was Elliot, who had just returned from the airport. "Come here, Elliot," Harriet beckoned. Her grandson came over. Elliot immediately sat down beside her and began to speak. "Grandma, Anastasia has been refusing our help, so maybe I just learned that she's a single mother with an illegitimate child. You must take care of this poor mother and child, Elliot. It's your duty." Elliot stared at the old lady in disbelief, shocked by her suggestion. He had thought she would give up on this, but instead she was even more determined to stick to her guns. Though unwilling, Elliot finally agreed. Anastasia, the chief designer, was recalled to the country to oversee brand expansion. She moved into a company-arranged apartment and reminisced about her ordeal 5 years ago, hesitating to call her father. On the other side, to fulfill his grandmother's pursuit of Anastasia, Elliot spent $10 billion to acquire the company where she was working at the time. Anastasia enrolled her son in kindergarten and began working at her new company, where her assistant was Grace Ellis. During a company meeting, Anastasia was surprised to find that the boss had changed. Elliot's appearance as the new boss caused astonishment among everyone. During the meeting, Elliot kept staring at Anastasia, jealousy among the other female employees. After the meeting, Anastasia wanted to leave the company but was helpless because she had signed a 5-year contract. When Anastasia returned to her office, Elliot followed her in and offered to repay her mother's life-saving kindness, adding that he could help raise her son together. "I heard you have a son. If you'd like, I can raise him with you. Take care of him," Elliot proposed. Anastasia suddenly looked up at the man opposite her. At that moment, a thought flashed through her mind. For a split second she even thought that her son looked like this man. How strange. "I don't need anyone to help me raise my son," Anastasia refused. "My grandmother wants me to marry you and take care of you and your child for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Elliot said bluntly. Although he was talking about marriage, his gaze was indifferent, as if he were just shouldering a responsibility. Anastasia suddenly found it amusing. She flipped her long hair and looked at the man opposite her. "Look at me. Do I look like someone who would marry someone casually? Even though you're impressive and handsome, I don't fancy you." A startled expression appeared on Elliot's handsome face. Was he not attractive to this woman at all? Well, regardless, this is exactly the outcome I want. As he wished, they were not attracted to each other. "I hope you can visit my grandmother, Miss Tillman, personally," Elliot said. After all, only this woman could reject him on behalf of his grandmother's wish, because in his heart he was still responsible for another woman. He then stated that as her boss he would take care of her at work. Anastasia didn't want to accept Elliot's special treatment and declined the luxury apartment he offered. Anastasia was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows in her office, picking up the phone to call her dad. "Hello. Who's this?" came a familiar voice from the other end. Anastasia felt a burning sensation in her nose and shouted to the side, "Dad, it's me. It's Anastasia." "Anastasia? Where have you been for these 5 years?" "I couldn't find you," Francis said, sounding thrilled. Since they're father and daughter, why hold on to grudges? Anastasia, with tears in her eyes, said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I've been living abroad for so many years, and now I'm coming back to work in the country." "All right, as long as you're coming back. When are you heading home?" I'll be home in a couple of days." "Good, as long as you're healthy and safe. It's all my fault for kicking you out. Let's just forget about the past," Anastasia comforted him. She'd been through all the hardships and didn't want to think about them anymore. "All right, come home as soon as you can." Francis sighed. Anastasia hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Actually, she wasn't ready to go home just yet. As long as Dad was healthy and safe, that was good enough. At the Tillman house, Francis had just arrived. He glanced at his wife watching TV on the sofa and sighed happily, saying, "Naomi, I got a call today. Guess who it was from?" "Who?" Naomi looked at him curiously. "It was Anastasia. She's been living abroad for so many years. No wonder I couldn't get in touch with her," Francis said happily. He didn't notice his wife's face suddenly change and the hatred in her eyes intensify. "Why are you still thinking about her? She embarrassed you before. Don't let her back into our house." "Naomi, I've thought about it a lot and I don't think she's like that. It must have been a misunderstanding and it's been so many years. Let's just let it go." "What misunderstanding?" "Erika took photos of her going to that kind of place at midnight. The evidence is conclusive. Naomi didn't expect Anastasia to come back after being kicked out. Could it be that she saw the development of our company and came back to fight for the family assets?" They're all mine. Anastasia won't get any of it unless I'm dead." Seeing his wife unhappy, Francis didn't say anything else and went upstairs, feeling tired. Then, Naomi quickly picked up her phone and dialed her daughter's number. "Hey Mom. Erika, guess who's back?" "Who?" "That bitch Anastasia called your dad today. She's back." "What? How could she come back?" "She must be eyeing our family assets and wants a piece of the pie. As long as I'm here, she won't get away with it," Naomi sneered, looking bitter. "I could kick her out 5 years ago and I can do it again if she comes back." Erika was confident too. At that moment, Erika, who was at the spa club, hung up her mom's call and immediately contacted Haley. Back in the day, they ganged up and took Anastasia's virginity, then kicked her out of the house. Nowadays she and Haley were best friends, but Haley had been out of touch for 2 weeks and her store was closed. So Erika didn't know what Haley was up to. Soon Haley's voice came through the phone. "Hey Erika. Haley, what have you been up to lately? Why did you close your store?" "Oh, traveling." "What's up?" "Haley, I have some bad news for you. Anastasia is back in the country." Inside the luxurious villa, Haley, who was enjoying the service of her maid on the sofa, dropped her phone in shock. She quickly picked it up, took a deep breath and nervously asked, "When did she come back? Why did she come back? Why are you nervous? Are you afraid of her?" "No, I was just asking. My dad told me. I don't know what she's up to, but I'm sure she came back to fight for the family assets with me, and she might cause trouble for you too." Haley's eyes flashed with malice when she heard that. Why didn't Anastasia die abroad? Then I wouldn't have to panic. Everything Haley was enjoying now was because of her. As long as she was alive, she would never let Elliot know the truth. "I can't let him know it was Anastasia back then. Erika, I'm afraid she'll retaliate against me too. Can you tell me everything you know about her from now on? So I can be better prepared," Haley said to Erika. Erika replied, "Okay, we'll deal with her together from now on." After hanging up the phone, Haley bit her lip. She was used to being treated like a rich girl and only having the best things. To make up for her, Elliot gave her everything she wanted. Haley became even greedier, and she wanted more than just material compensation. In fact, she wanted to become Elliot's wife. Being the woman of a man like Elliot must be the happiest thing in the world. So she would never let Anastasia ruin her plans. Not even Erika could know, otherwise, Erika would be jealous and expose her. So she had to know everything about Anastasia, preferably finding a way to make her disappear from this world. 10:30 a.m. "Anastasia, it's time for a department meeting now." Anastasia replied, "Got it." Elliot elegantly walked in and took the head seat at the table. Soon the meeting finally wrapped up. Elliot had mainly come to listen and didn't share too many opinions. "Anastasia, you stay here. Everyone else can leave," Elliot suddenly said. Anastasia, who was about to take a sip of water to lubricate her throat, almost choked on it upon hearing that. The room was instantly filled with envy and hatred, especially from Alice, who glared at her as if she had used some dirty tricks to seduce Elliot. Anastasia was also speechless. Couldn't this man see her situation at the company? Everyone else was looking down on her and he was just fanning the flames. Elliot wanted Anastasia to accept the house he offered her, but after she refused, he decided to approach it from another angle and asked his assistant to investigate the identity of Anastasia's son's father. Just then Elliot's phone rang. He picked it up and saw that it was Haley calling. "Hello," he replied as gently as possible. "Elliot, are you busy with work? Can I have dinner with you tonight?" "Sure, I'll make a reservation at a restaurant," Elliot agreed. "Then I'll wait for you to pick me up," Haley said excitedly. Of course, Elliot hung up the phone and Haley's face popped into his mind. Somehow Haley didn't resemble that woman from that night at all. He vaguely remembered that woman from that night, with lips as soft as could be imagined and a faint fragrance emanating from her body. Although she cried throughout, her voice was incredibly melodious, while Haley's voice was somewhat sharp. 5 years had passed and anyone could undergo tremendous changes. So Elliot just wanted to make amends, since what he did that night had caused irreparable harm to her life. At the high-end restaurant, Haley wore a new Chanel dress and was dressed up beautifully. Although she used expensive cosmetics and was meticulously made up by a makeup artist, she was still not eye-catching despite being in the category of average beauty. She was an average-looking beauty, not ugly but not stunning either. However, tonight she was the most envied woman in the entire restaurant, sitting opposite a handsome, elegant, charming man who radiated an imperial aura. "Elliot, cheers." Haley actively raised her glass and looked at the man opposite with enthusiasm. Although she had only known Elliot for 3 weeks, Haley had always been polite to him. However, she wanted much more than that. She wanted his heart, his body, and ultimately to become his wife. Now, since she had won his attention and everything he gave her, she was terrified of losing it all. She was happy to be wealthy. She could get whatever she wanted delivered to her the next second. Her favorite new Chanel dress could be delivered directly to her doorstep for her to choose from. If she wanted a specific bag, she could buy it in every color. If she wanted diamond jewelry, she could just pick her favorites. This feeling was like floating on a cloud. After experiencing such a luxurious life, Haley never wanted to go back to the way it was before. However, Haley had a bad premonition. She was worried that Anastasia would suddenly come back home and learn the truth about what happened that night. If that happened, she would lose everything and be forced to live like she did before. Whenever she thought about it, she told herself that she would never let that happen. Therefore, when Elliot took her back to his mansion after dinner, Haley shyly invited the man inside. But Elliot declined. On the other hand, Anastasia's father, Francis, specially informed the chef at the Tillman mansion to prepare dinner for Anastasia. But her stepmother Naomi instructed the chef to only prepare her daughter's favorite dishes, completely disregarding Anastasia. "Mom, do you know Anastasia is coming back for dinner?" Erika walked in from the door looking dejected. Naomi nodded. "Your dad insisted that she have dinner with us. I have nothing to say about it. It's been 5 years. I don't know how she's doing now." Erika pursed her lips. How well could her life be? She left at 19 without even finishing college. In my opinion, she must be coming back to inherit the inheritance because she's struggling financially now. Naomi sniffed with dissatisfaction. "Mom, you can't let her take what belongs to me. Everything from Dad is mine," Erika boldly stated, as if she were the legitimate heir to her father's inheritance. "Of course, she has nothing to do with the inheritance," Naomi firmly replied. Elsewhere, Anastasia took a taxi with her son to the Tillman house, teaching him what to do next. Fortunately, her son was smart and understood what Anastasia said. Anastasia softened and immediately hugged her son, kissing him. At that moment, Francis happened to be at his doorstep. He left the office earlier than usual because he couldn't wait to see his daughter whom he hadn't seen for 5 years. Soon he saw a taxi approaching him. As soon as the car stopped, he approached it. Then a slim lady stepped out of the car. It was Anastasia. Soon he saw a boy walking out from behind Anastasia. The sight in front of him completely stunned him. How could his daughter have a little boy who looked 4 or 5 years old? Could it be that Francis couldn't help but be surprised by what he saw. Looking at her father, Anastasia realized how much he had aged over the past 5 years. Therefore, she began to understand what happened that year and also blamed herself for not staying in touch with Francis for 5 years. "Dad, I'm back." Anastasia took her son's hand, walked over to Francis, and then looked at her son, saying, "Jared, say hello to your grandpa." "Grandpa." Jared looked up and called out to Francis. "Grandpa?" Francis was stunned by the child's voice and looked at Jared in astonishment. "Is this my grandson? You already have a child?" "Stat. His name is Jared and he's 3.5 years old." Anastasia refused to tell Francis her son's actual age because she didn't want him to deduce when she gave birth to Jared. 3.5, and he's already so tall. Francis couldn't believe he already had such a handsome grandson. "Yeah." Anastasia smiled. "And where's the father of your son?" Francis asked. Anastasia replied, "I haven't lived with him since I gave birth to Jared." "Yeah, I've only lived with Mom, Grandpa," the child added. When Francis realized that he hadn't done anything to help his daughter raise his grandson, tears welled up in his eyes. "What a terrible grandfather I am. Even worse, I kicked my own daughter out of the house 5 years ago. It's my fault. It's all my fault, Anastasia. Please forgive me. I will definitely make it up to you." Francis was overwhelmed by guilt. "It's unnecessary. Jared and I are doing fine on our own." Anastasia didn't want her father's guilt to overwhelm him. "Come in. Let me hug you, dear Jared." Francis bent down and hugged Jared. Just as Anastasia and her father walked into the living room, Naomi saw a child in her husband's arms and asked in surprise, "Honey, who's that child?" "Naomi, this is Anastasia's son whom she had while living abroad," Francis happily announced, showing his excitement about the arrival of his grandson. After all, his biggest regret was not having a son, although he wasn't picky about it. Therefore he treated his daughter's son like his own son because Jared was still a descendant of his bloodline. What? Naomi was shocked when she learned that the child was Anastasia's son. "Mom," Anastasia coldly greeted Naomi. "Oh dear. We didn't know you had become a mother 5 years later. Why didn't you tell us?" Naomi pretended to be concerned, thinking it was something she had to do in front of her husband. "Who's the father of the child? Why isn't he here?" "Naomi, Anastasia raised this child alone." Francis quickly reminded her to stop asking unnecessary questions. At that moment, Naomi immediately thought that Anastasia wanted to use her son to get more of the inheritance, considering them both as even bigger threats. But she found that Francis was very fond of the boy. "Oh, a single mother. How touching, how noble," Naomi said sarcastically. The young boy seemed to sense the implication in Naomi's tone and looked at the woman asking, "Who are you?" Naomi glanced at the child and said, "Say hello to your grandmother." "My mom said my grandmother passed away long ago, so how are you my grandmother?" the boy asked, his innocence and purity indirectly telling Naomi's ill intentions. "Oh gosh, look at this child. How rude he is. Anastasia, if you don't teach him some manners, how do you expect him to live decently when he grows up?" Naomi questioned Anastasia's upbringing in an annoyed manner. "My son's performance has nothing to do with you, period," Anastasia said coldly, using a buzzword-like tone. Francis is aware of the tense relationship between the two ladies. He glares at Naomi and scolds her. "Anastasia and her son have just returned, so there's no need for your sarcasm. Just get along with her, okay?" "Dad, who's that kid?" Erika appears on the stairs, staring at her father who's holding a child in his arms. "That's your nephew, the child your sister had abroad," Naomi replies unhappily. Erika's eyes widen. "What?" Then she walks down the stairs and approaches Anastasia, asking, "Why didn't you tell us about your child? What's going on?" But Francis stops her from asking further with a frown. She dares not continue. He then takes Jared to the garden. The atmosphere among the three women in the living room becomes even more tense. As soon as Francis and Jared leave, Erika walks up to Anastasia with a cold smile. "Did you have an affair with some married man and had that illegitimate child, huh?" "My business is none of your business," Anastasia responds coldly. For some reason, Erika feels that Anastasia has become even more beautiful. At that moment she starts to feel even more jealous of Anastasia's looks. Goodness, she doesn't even look like she's given birth. "Anastasia, I don't know why you're back, but I'm warning you, don't think about those stupid things again. This family has nothing to do with you," Naomi threatens her. Anastasia chuckles and asks, "Why not? When my father first started the company, my grandparents also invested, but you two dare to take everything without doing anything. Know your place, Anastasia. 5 years ago I kicked you out of the Tillman family and I can do the same anytime." Erika tries to intimidate Anastasia. "The only reason I'm back is for my father and it's none of your business. Besides, my dad can do whatever he wants with his inheritance, which is not something you need to worry about," Anastasia rebuts Erika and Naomi, mocking them both. Naomi is speechless, but she quickly retaliates to avoid embarrassment. "He's my husband, so of course I want him to live a long life." Erika rushes to defend her mother. "Anastasia, what are you talking about? My mom loves my dad." Despite this, Anastasia picked up her phone, sat on the sofa and refused to engage with them further. During dinner, Francis curiously asks Anastasia about her profession. "I studied jewelry design abroad and now I'm a designer at a pretty well-known company," she replies. "Not bad. That company's name is pretty famous," Francis praises Anastasia. "Dad, I'm also looking for a job. I'm currently interviewing for a car salon model. Erika proudly interrupts, introducing her job to her father. What kind of job is that? You'd better quit or I'll be embarrassed. Frances glares at Erika and gives her a stern look. Honey, Erika is just having fun exploring opportunities around her. I'm sure she'll come work at your company later. Naomi tries to intervene. What can she do at my company? Receptionist. Frances sneers. Erika hates Anastasia even more because her presence indirectly exposes her shortcomings. Grandpa, my mom is an amazing designer. She even participated in the International Jewelry Design Competition. Jared happily chimes in. The child's words bring a smile to Frances's face. The delighted Frances decides to take his grandson to the mall to buy toys later. Back at home, Jared can't help but ask Anastasia, Mom, can you tell me where Dad is? Anastasia pauses because she knows Jared will definitely ask this question. Then she looks at him seriously and says, I don't know where he is, Jared. In fact, we may never see him again. But no matter what, I promise I'll be by your side. I love you, dear. Jared nods and obediently goes to play with the new toys his grandpa bought him. Anastasia watches her son's back and falls into thought. She knows in her heart that it's not hard to find her son's father, as she's sure Erika and Haley have the answer. After all, it was them who tricked her into a room with a gigolo. But because of that, she vows never to let her son know about his father's embarrassing profession. Thanks for listening till here. We've covered the content from Chapter 1 to Chapter 9 here. The novel is pretty long and can't be fully presented in this video. If you're interested, you can find the rest of it in the novel.